So we're gonna begin by talking about this very intriguing topic called a movie about your life. Think about this for a second. If a movie could be played made of your entire life, your every thought, every interaction with people, every experience you ever had, and they will play out in real time, what would that movie look like? And you would actually think of yourself now as you are the director, you are the cast, you are the screenwriter, you are the film editor, you are the producer, you are the critic, you are the audience, you are everything. And of course, there are no limits to what is portrayed in this movie, and the content can be changed at any time. And your mind is, as I said, your director, your producer, the star of the movie, the cast, the critic, everything. But your mind is split into two halves. The one half is driven by the ego, and the ego produces fear. And the other half is of your mind is the Christ mind. And the Christ mind, of course, produces a life of love and joy and peace. And you have a choice which part of you would be directing this movie. So think about your life as a movie for just a few moments and think about what that would really look like. And so what I want to do today is to talk about the difference between fear and love, and actually explain in a little bit more detail, because a lot of times we have just bits and pieces of it, and we kind of a lot of times instinctively know the difference, but to be able to just vocalize it and verbalize it and put it into distinct categories, I think is going to be something that maybe is beneficial to you. So let's begin with a Bible verse, and you have heard this spoken many, many times. So I'm going to read it to you from 1 John 4. It says, God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So you have here in one corner, you have God, you have love, and then you have Jesus in one corner. And the other corner, you have fear, and you have punishment, and you have torment, and you have suffering, and you got the ego mind, and you have the separation. And so I want to be able to just look at these two words for briefly today. And the first word we're going to look at is love. What is love? So let me just first of all talk about what love is not. Now, love is not a thought. Most people and a lot of people think that love is a thought, but we have about 50,000 thoughts or 60,000 thoughts per day. And to reduce love to just a thought, when we just read here that God is love, then we would just say that all that God is a thought, which makes no sense. So love is not a thought. Love is not a belief even. Now, of course, love, actually a thought leads to love, or can lead to love. And love can lead to thoughts, but it's not a thought in itself. Secondly, love is not an emotion. Emotions are thoughts that could create a sensation within you. You know that emotional experience, but it's not an emotion, because the word emotion comes from a Latin word, emotus, which means to agitate, to stir up, to distract, to move away, to move out. Implied is that your natural state of being is that of love, joy, and peace. And an emotion is anything that distracts you or moves you away from that natural place of peace and love and grace. So anything that kind of shakes you up, stirs you up, and moves you away is an emotion. So even though There are many different things you can talk about emotion, but love is not an emotion. And love is not an action or something that we do either. I've heard this, I'm sure you have heard this as well, especially in Christian and religious backgrounds. We say, well, love is an action, it's something you do. And it's a commandment, some people say. But actually, if you read what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he says something very contrary to that. He says, even if you feed, or if you give all your possessions to the poor, but do not have love, you have gained nothing. So he's actually saying you can give everything to the poor. You can give it all. The house, the houses, the furnitures, the cars, the 401ks, the whole shebang, everything. You can give it all away to the poor, but it doesn't mean that you have love. So he actually, even though obviously if you have love, you will give and you are generous. If you know love and if you know God, you will be generous. But it's also possible to give and not have love. So you cannot therefore make that, it's therefore impossible to suggest that love and action is the same thing. It's not the same thing. So what is love then? Well, first of all, love is energy. Now, when I say the word energy, it's like a frightening word, especially if you come from my background. It's kind of a frightening word to use. Like love is energy. You don't want to put it in the same category as a SD and G electrical bill. That just doesn't sound right. Or you don't want to put it in the same category as what you have a lack of when you have run your first 5K or something like that. That is not the category you want to put love into. But when you actually begin to think about how the universe and what really is the universe, you know that essentially the entire universe is energy. Now, there are different types of energy. You have like light energy. You have nuclear energy. There are gravitational energy. There are many different types of energies. But essentially, all of us, our very essence is energy. In fact, we are made up of particles, atoms, and cells, and the cluster of cells. It becomes a form, and the form becomes like a heart or something like that, and then you're part of this physical body. But once you begin to actually move down from there, you come into the subatomic level. And there, when you actually begin to observe, you will know that 99.9% of what you are is energy, and you're invisible, which is mind-boggling and totally weird. But at the same time, it's important to understand that we are energy. And then you think about it. Think about moments in your life where you have actually had like a real sense of unconditional love. I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm not talking about friendship love, but I'm talking about real moments when you really have felt love and there is just something about it. There is an energy, right? I was thinking about this. Kim was watching this series on Netflix, and she comes in and she's all teary-eyed. She's been watching this thing, and it's about really kind of appropriate in this kind of political world we're in right now, where two people from polar opposites of the political spectrum actually have to learn to get along and be together, and it's moving. At least that's what I think I got out of the story. I haven't watched it myself. And she's telling the story, and she's moved, and she's tearing up, and I'm feeling the energy myself, so I'm feeling what she's saying. There's an energy because it's something about love that creates an energy in the room. So love is an energy. You see, if you ever watched, I don't know if you remember Susan Boyle, the woman who sang I Dream a Dream, and she didn't look the part. She didn't look like British Got Talent or Britain Got Talent or whatever it was called. She didn't look like she was anything, like she was not star material. And you would think someone of her stature at that age would just get up there and make a fool of herself. But when she opened her mouth and began to sing, it was such an incredible voice, and we were all stunned, and we watched the video, the viral video, over and over and over and over again. Why? Because there was an energy about it. There was something that moved us on a deeper level. Because love is energy. And you listen to a person's story, your heart gets touched because love is energy. And then you think about God. God is love, as we read. But you could also essentially see love is God. And then, as I mentioned to you before, what is God? When you begin to actually study the Bible, and most traditions would agree with this, that God is spirit. Now, the word for spirit, and we know this, the Hebrew word where that word was first introduced into the Bible was ruach. And the word ruach literally meant wind and breath. So why would they have called it that before we had Albert Einstein show up on the scene? They didn't have Albert Einstein back in those days. How many understand that? So they didn't know anything about, the subatomic world and cells and everything else. And they didn't understand any of that. They didn't understand how the universe is made up of dark energy and dark matter, and no one really knows what it is, except that it's intelligent and it contains something that is, holds the universe together. They didn't understand any of that. They just observed. And as they observed, they saw the wind. And when they saw the wind, it struck them as something powerful because they could see the branches on the trees move in the wind, and they could feel the wind. I was watching my dog the other day, and I was fascinated by it. I was sitting outside and writing my book, and my dog is laying there, and suddenly, when there was a gust of wind, she runs up and just runs into the house and hides underneath the bed. And I thought, what in the world happened to her? She got like totally crazy running in, and I thought, well, she was stunned by the wind, because you can't see the wind, but it has this power. It has this energy. And so when we think of God, we get so easily distracted by this view that we have of God, this pagan view of God, that he's a white-haired man sitting up there and far away and, with a long beard, we don't know where. That he is a being like us, that he is formed like us. But reality is that is contrary to everything the Bible says and everything that we understand even of science today. God is spirit, and spirit is simply another word for energy. And as I said, it sounds terrible to refer to and speak of God as energy, but when you realize that we are energy, it begins to make sense. We're created in God's image. And I would suggest to you that the highest form of energy, because I mentioned before there are many types of energy, I would suggest to you that the highest form of energy is this thing called love. And we see this, in fact, when we study the Bible and when we read the Bible, we see how the evidence of this, in him we live and move and have our being. In God, who is spirit, who is love. In him we live and move and have our being. Whatever it is that's surrounding us, that whatever it is that kind of unites us, this energy, it's something bigger than myself. It's transcending of all life. And I would suggest to you that the thing that gives life is ultimately love. It's an energy that is based on love. David said, when I make my bed in hell, you are there. Even in the midst of my darkest moments, I cannot escape. I cannot escape your presence, because your presence is everywhere, and that presence is love. So I would suggest that the entire universe permeates with God and permeates with God's essence, that is love, because love is energy. It says in Ephesians, the Father is over all, through all, and in all. You don't hear much spoken about that today. to suggest that the Father is overall, through all, and in all. That is a mind-boggling proposition for many people. But that's what the Bible says. And that Christ is all and in all. And so this energy that, all things consists in, that every one of us have our being in, is this energy of love. And then I would also suggest to you that love is union. Think about it. When a mother gives birth to a child and carries that child for 9 months in her womb, there is a union, there is a bond, there is something that is formed, and that bond is never broken, because there is a bond, there is an energy, there is a union of love there. When you snuggle up with your furry friend, as Kim says, when you snuggle up with that dog, what are you doing? You are in union. It's a form of union you have with that dog. When we are together meeting like this, there is a form of a union, a bond, a togetherness. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, He's in our midst. There is a union. Love is union. Our children, Nate and Steph, they were telling me when they went to listen to Coldplay, they said it was like this energy. There was this like incredible experience of every one of these thousands and tens of thousands of people who had gathered at the Hollywood Bowl. And there was this energy. And as they were singing together, there was an energy, there was a union, there was something there, and it was full of peace, it was full of love. There was just something there that brought them all together. When you go to church, when you go to a concert, when you sing together, when you verbalize the same words, when you sing out the same words, when you take the breath at the same time, there is something unifying about that. There's a union, and the deepest, and on our deepest level, our union is with God. Jesus spoke of this union between God and humanity. And as I quoted before, he said, in Him we live and move and have our being. He said, I'm in the Father. The Father is in me. You are in me. I'm in you. He spoke of this union. This was more than just some kind of, conversation, interesting thing to say. I believe that is literal when he says, the Father is in me, I'm in the Father, you are in me, and I'm in you. And we are one, it says, we're one with the Lord and one with one another, which is also an interesting thing to consider, that we are one with one another. In fact, when Jesus is asked in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 24, he's asked this question, what's the greatest commandment of all? And you know the answer. He says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And then he says, and the second one is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, most of us have read that as saying, love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And therefore we have heard teachings about you need to love yourself, because if you're not able to love yourself, you cannot love others. But that is not what is being said here. What is being said is, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as he would be you, in other words. In other words, it speaks of the union. It speaks of, I'm in my neighbor. I'm in her. I'm in him. We are one together, which is a unique concept, a new way of looking at it. And then Jesus said something interesting. He's talking to these religious people. These people who know how to pray the right prayers, the people who know how to say the right words, or know how to look good. And, they come and talk about God. And he says something, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. Well, I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. What he's talking about here is that he's saying to people that, and actually if you read this whole context, it's kind of a little more clear if I were to read the entire thing, but just to explain, he was basically saying to them that the way you treat the least of these, you treat me. So they are all flabbergasted and says, well, you know, they said, hey, listen, Jesus, when did we ever see you naked? When did we ever see you without food and didn't feed you? When did we ever see you thirsty and didn't give you something to drink? When did we ever see you as a stranger? Now, the word stranger actually means foreigner. The word is foreigner. When did we ever see you as a foreigner and did not invite you in? When did we, see you naked and didn't clothe you? When did we, didn't visit you when you get sick? When you were in prison? When did we not come to see you and help you out? And Jesus says, well, he says, no, you didn't. Because, in their mind, they thought Jesus was this guy, that you see on this picture with, how many remember those pictures you had in church with a picture of Jesus on the little portrait there, and he was like this long-haired guy, little, brown hair. He kind of had sad eyes and looked, very dignified. And we think, well, that Jesus, I certainly invited him in. I certainly fed him. I certainly would have taken care of him. If he had a preaching voice like T.D. Jakes, I would have invited him in. If he was like on television, had a great ministry, if he was a mega church pastor, I would have invited him. I would have taken care of him. I would have done the thing, because that's the image of, we have this image of this mighty warrior Jesus that is so big, so grand, so awesome. And we say, oh yeah, we would invite him in, because there's something in us that likes to be around power, strength, beauty. But Jesus says, that's not where I was. He says, I wasn't the one that was naked. Jesus identified with the least of these. And he says, I'm in them. Why? Because union or love is union. It is identifying, sharing our identity with the least of these, which sometimes I'm struck by this. I think about it when I drive and I see someone with homeless person whose hair is messed up and he looks like he hasn't had a shower for months and he just sits there and his teeth are not brushed. And you say, Jesus says, I'm in him. How does that affect how I relate to him? Hear me. Love is union. Love is union of all things. And love is his energy that causes all things to be held together. There is no separation in love. For love is a unifying energy that permeates the entire universe. All of us have our being in this union of love. It's the ultimate and ever-present reality, the truth of our existence. Our meaning in life is to consciously be aware of the union of love and to experience it in ourselves and in others. So this leads me to fear. What is fear? Well, I don't know if I shared this last time we had this, but fear, I was at the mall and I had this thought, this feeling, I had been thinking about that I'm creating an image and likeness of God. I've been thinking about what I just spoke about here, that love is union and everything is one. We are in him. We all have our being in him. Christ is in everyone. And so I'm standing there at the mall. I'm exchanging some pleasantries with the person who's standing in front of me, and we talk a little bit, and then I turn around. And as I turn around, like I have this vision or this kind of experience where I see the union of all things. It's like I'm seeing things from outside myself almost. I'm looking at things, and you think this is weird and strange and everything else, and that's okay. I'm just telling my experience. You can, reject it or whatever. It doesn't matter. But I saw this incredible union of all things, and I looked around and I saw the people scurrying around, and they're you know, and I'm thinking everything is one. There's God's presence is everywhere. But as I'm walking out, I'm struck by specifically one lady. She's an elderly lady. I think she had a Hispanic background. And I look at her, and I make eye contact with her, and her eyes are lifeless. It appears to me she's somewhere else. She is not seeing things. She is somewhere else. And it hit me right there and then that she's trapped in her mind. She is living in her mind, not aware of the present reality. And so here is the dilemma, that even though this union of love is the very energy that fills and permeates the universe, that is God, that we all have our being in Him we live and move and have our being, that He is the Father's over all, through all, and in all. This transcendent life that we're all surrounded by, we're not aware of it because our mind is blinded to it. So what is fear? Fear is a thought or thoughts about a reality that does not exist. What I mean by that is, I posted this on Instagram recently. I thought it was pretty good. You may not like it, but I thought it was pretty good. Fear creates a form of a parallel universe where the anxiety, craziness, and trauma it imagines seem more real than what is real. Think about that. There's so much of what happens in our mind that is based on and nothing real. It is just things that produces fear. For example, one of the things that I'm trying to do less of is watch news. Let me tell you why. Because I find that when you watch news for an hour, you lose touch with reality, and it actually creates fear inside of you. It doesn't matter whether you're watching news based on the left or the right. It's all the same as far as I'm concerned. It all creates fear, especially at the time of election. It's always creating fear in the opponent. It's always about saying this is going to happen in the world. And if you listen, and we all have an unconscious bias. We all have a bias toward a certain lean or certain political direction. So whatever we are listening to, we're feeding our mind. And so it's all there to produce fear, that we're afraid about the future. So therefore, the whole scenario is to vote for the right person that's going to give us the right future. But it's all based on motivating us through fear. It's stoking fear. It's inducing fear in our minds. So the more you watch news, and you basically become very frightened. And one thing I do sometimes, I watch news, and then I just sit outside and I think to myself, wow, the world is so beautiful. I just watched the news and I heard that the world is basically in a total mess. There's chaos. Everything is a mess. And I go outside and I says, man, those trees, those flowers are beautiful. My pool looks great. Oh, look at those mountains in the distance. They haven't changed a bit from yesterday. They all look the same. Nothing has changed except that I have created a reality in my mind by outside forces that are conditioning my mind for their own purposes because of egos that are like us, like all of us, have separated themselves from a conscious awareness of the union of love that we share. So even, when the stock market fell, like this last week, the stock market fell. And I saw some of my stocks, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there was initial panic that broke out. I'm thinking, oh, look at all the money I'm losing right now. And I went back to a place of pain when I've lost money in the past, and I'm reminded of the pain. And when I'm reminded of the pain, now what happens is I begin to imagine my future, what will happen because of losing this money. So you see how fear is a thought or thoughts about a reality that does not exist. Fear is a sensation in your body that hides peace. You can literally feel fear. If you actually would sit down and just close your eyes for the next few moments and just think about some of the most tragic, traumatic experiences you've had in your life, and you just think about it deeply, you would probably come to a place of a sensation in your body. You would actually literally feel it in your body. It's like it will be there, right? It's like an emotion. It would distract you. It would move you away from the peace that you felt beforehand. It will shift your sense of consciousness, and you feel in your body. And fear is an energy that emanates from your mind. So think about love as the energy of the universe. God is love that holds all things together. And then think about fear as an energy that is produced by our minds. You know, Paul said, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but a power and of sound mind. So he says that the fear is a spirit. And we talked about this just a few moments ago, that spirit is ruach, wind and breath. And that ruach is really a modern day term would be energy. So this energy of fear that the mind creates actually has a way to break down your body. It actually destroys your body. It affects your immune system. It destroys you from within. And the more you have these, for example, unforgiveness, the more you have stress, the more you have all these emotions, these distractions as a continuous hum within you, and you feel this sensation. If you actually slow down and listen to your body when you're under all this stress, you can actually feel your own body almost shaking. The more you have that, the more it's going to break down your body, and the more it's going to be programmed as memories into your cells. And eventually, that's the cause of sickness and disease in our bodies. So this energy that emanates from our mind is very destructive. This energy of fear gives rise to anger, to jealousy, to hatred, to evil, to depression, to anxiety, to worry, to terror. It makes us irrational. It's a strong energy that deforms reality. Fear projects, another thing about fear is fear projects its past failures into future punishment. Remember what we read here, fear involves torment. And then remember how in the Garden of Eden, that when they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they were afraid, right? Remember that? And they heard God walking in the garden, so they were afraid, and they hid themselves from God. So why were they afraid? Because they experienced guilt. The moment they experienced guilt, they separated themselves from being aware of unconditional love. They separated themselves from the union of love. They felt that I am not good enough for this union. I experienced guilt, and therefore there was fear. So now, because something had happened in the past, there was a guilt. They had eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So now they projecting their future punishment. In other words, fear says, God is showing up. You're going to be punished for your misdeed. And was there punishment? Yes, but it wasn't necessarily from God. It was our own punishment. And the punishment was simply that we were no longer aware of love, unconditional love. So think about this, how much of this time we spent in our mind is about the past, reliving the past, rehashing the past, rehashing that conversation, rehashing what happened then. And then we project what happened in the past on our future, and we miss what is happening right now, living in the present moment and being aware of God. You know, I think about, even when I had cluster headaches, you know the story about when I had cluster headaches, that I think there was a lot of guilt. There's a lot of things in me, failures and everything else I looked at. And somehow or another, I felt when I reflected upon it, I felt a future punishment of some kind. So it was like almost I self-sabotaged my own life. I allowed these cluster headaches to come. It was a form of punishment for what I've done wrong and for my failures and for everything else. And I think that's what we do. So much of the depression that we're dealing with, so much of the problems, the irrational thoughts that we have, so much of the turmoil we're in, so much of the chaos, so much of the anxiety, all of that is a form of punishment. Because we have experienced something in the past that we feel guilty about, that we feel wrong about, that we feel like that made us feel shameful, that made us feel insecure. And so now, subconsciously, we need to punish ourselves in the future. And therefore, one of the ways we punish ourselves is through sickness. Another way is through depression. Another way is through anxiety. Another way is through worry. Another way is through whatever other debilitating emotion. And it's of course horrible and very destructive. Fear separates our mind from our shared union with God, who is love. Think about this. Someone did you wrong. They spoke behind your back and said some horrible things, and you feel humiliated. And the more you think about the injustice, the more angry you get, right? And have you ever noticed that the more you consider the injustice, the more you think about it, the more you fill your mind with what people said and how they humiliated, the more it begins to take over in your life. It becomes like this force within you. It becomes like this energy. It's like a spirit that is not gripped. You don't even know how to shake it anymore because it's so it just taken on its life on its own. It's just so overwhelming you with all these emotions, and you feel like a loss. You go into a shell. You don't know how to deal and cope, and you have all these problems. And you say, where's God in all of this? Where's God? Well, God is always present, right? But we have so pushed away from God because we allowed fear in our lives, and that we're so unwilling to allow that union to be restored and to just be loved and accepted, that we demand justice. We want justice. So let me just go to the last part. What is perfect love that drives out fear? Now, perfect means something brought to its end, fulfilled and completed. And actually, if you read 1 John in its context, it says this: God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. Now the word here, lives, means to dwell in, to be continue to be present. In other words, continue to be present in love, and whoever lives or continues to be present in love continues to be present in God, and God is continually present with them. This is how love is made complete or made perfect in us. So he's saying, okay, I just told you here now, this is how love was made perfect in you. By you living, being present in love, being there continuing in love, and not allowing fear to take over. And the moment that you become present in love, it's not going to drive out fear. And now you're no longer going to suffer the torment. You're no longer going to suffer the complexities and the chaos in your mind, because you're going to be free. So how do we continually stay present in love? Well, first of all, there's something about staying present and not allowing your mind to deviate in one direction or another. But I think that the way to get there is very simple. The first step is forgiveness. You see, the fear mind sees the past and the future as the same. It doesn't want the future to be different than the past. The fear mind sees itself as innocent and others as guilty. And so forgiveness is a way to let go of the past. Surrender the past. Surrender the guilt. Surrender the fear. And come into the present. Forgiveness is the vehicle used for correcting our misperceptions. Misperception about our own life. Misperception about reality. Misperception about God. Misperception about, love. And forgiveness is aligning yourself again with God. And then another word that is often used that drives out fear is the word faith. Now, what is faith? Faith is now. It's always present. is always in the now. It's never in the future. It's not something you're getting. It's in the future. It's always right now. Now, the mind gets information from the five senses. And it will process that information from the lens of fear, because the egoic mind, the five senses says, I am isolated, I'm alone. It cannot perceive the union. It's not able to perceive the union we share together. So the mind doesn't do that. So it takes information based on the five senses. So the mind is always going to cause fear in our life. So faith is when you begin to perceive things outside the five senses. It perceives the union that we have with God. It perceives the love that we have with God, which leaves me with mindfulness and meditation that I talk so much about, because I've been doing this. And in my meditation lately, I start in my meditation by just thinking in contemplation about Jesus, that, when he walked in this earth, I think about what he said: love your neighbors as yourself. Do good to those that hate you. Love your enemies. I think about all the things that Jesus spoke about love. And he talks about the tree being in him. And then I think about how Jesus, through much pain and suffering, went to the cross and he died for each and every one of us. But then I think about something that I spoke about last time, that we have been crucified with Christ. And I actually picture myself, all my sin, all my failure, all my guilt, all my fear, all of that stuff, all of that in Jesus on the cross. I actually begin to see a reality that is not based on my five senses, but is based on something different. And I begin to see myself in him. And as I begin to see myself in him, I'm on the cross with him. And my ego experienced the death with him. I see that. And then I also come to the point of resurrection, that Jesus is raised from the dead and I have life with him. And then I begin to see that Jesus, he actually breathes on me, which is so significant. Remember that we talked about Ruach, his breath. He breathes on me his spirit. In other words, the energy of love, he breathes on me, the very essence of life. So as I breathe in peace. And I allow that peace. I feel everything in my body. I feel peace rushing through my entire body, through my mind, through my heart, through my legs, through my knees, through everything. And it's incredible when you actually begin to just be sensitive to your body. Because if you're actually sensitive to your body, you will discover there's all this fear, there's all this emotions that is causing all kinds of stress in your life. And when you begin to feel peace, it just calms you down, and you can actually feel it in your body. And so I'm mindful of that. I'm focused on that. And then I think of grace. That is in the moment of weakness. My grace is sufficient for you. When I'm weak, I am strong. And think about this word: when I am weak, when the ego is weak, then I am strong. In other words, there is a strength that comes when my self-sufficiency comes to an end and I come to a place of union. And that is the place of forgiveness. You see, the ego needs to feel like it's forgiven. The ego needs to feel, because the ego sees the world through reward and punishment. So I got to get to God. I got to be good like God. And so there's got to be a forgiveness of the past. So I come to a point of forgiveness, and that changes my perception. It changes. I sense the union again. And once I sense the union again, there is another step that takes place. And then I begin to come to the point of, I go through peace, I go through grace, and then I come to the point of love. And then I literally say these words, the Father is over all, through all, and in all. And I reflect on those words. And I think of those words, that I'm in union with all things. In Him I live, in Him I move, in Him I have my being. I'm in union with all things. And what happens is there is a transformation that takes place. So if you do this just once, you know, nothing good's going to come out of that. But if you continually, I shouldn't say that nothing good's going to come out of it, but less good is going to come out of it. But if you do this continually, what you're doing is you're actually changing your brain. You are beginning, and there's a transformation that takes place. And I find this, even when people irritate me, even when I get upset, I got to get back to that place of meditating, because then I get calm again. I get to a place of rest, and it actually has an effect on my body and my physical being. It improves my immune system, it improves my health, it improves my mental well-being and my emotional well-being. It changes me from the inside out. I feel free. It has such a profound effect, because I recognize that if you're truly aware, and that's all the meditation does, and that's what we meditate on. That's why I meditate on love, grace, and peace, and that's why I see in Jesus, when I behold Jesus, I see the love, the compassion, the freedom, and I begin to then become conscious, aware of this love that holds all the universe together. And that changes relationships. It changes everything in your life. Because, as I said, God is love. And whenever we are conscious of love, we are conscious of God. And when we are conscious of God, we are conscious of love. And when we're conscious of love, fear is driven out. And when there is no fear, there is no torment. There is no punishment. We are free.